All right. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to kind of walk through some sample code and I'm going to ask you some questions kind of as if I don't understand it. I basically have this just making like a very simple graph. Then I apply the BBC style and then I actually copied the code from GitHub. And so I just kind of want to like walk through it step by step. So you can kind of explain like what's happening in in the different pieces of it. Um, so yeah, let me go ahead and just run these lines here. And I just made, this is some code I had from something. I don't even
What are we
remember
looking
now.
at?
Just, it's something about penguins. I always use the Palmer penguins data set just for teaching. Very simple. It's, what is it? The percent, of all these penguins. So the penguins data set just has observations taken of different penguins on 3 different islands. And so, yeah, I think I just counted how many penguins there are in each island and just got a percent of for those islands of the total observations. So just made a very, very simple graph. This is obviously with no theme applied. And then using the BBC style function, let me go ahead and run that so people can see the contrast. So before I actually walk through the code, can you just at a very broad level talk about what are some of the main things that the BBC style function does?
I mean, one of the main things it does is that it strips out a lot of the first thing that jumps out at me is that it strips out a lot of the kind of like the panel background and just sets everything to like a white and clean background. That's the main thing. And then of course it sets the other thing that's kind of immediately obvious is that it changes the fonts of all of the text elements. So you don't have any title or subtitle at the moment, but if you did, that would have changed as well.
So I'll add a title just so people can see. Gotcha.
Yeah, the more the kind of thinking back to it, sort of ahead of talking, the more kind of, my God, this is like extremely basic. That's kind of what I realized, which is like at the time it felt like this is like incredible innovation, but thinking about it now, it's like it doesn't really do much, does it? But yeah, I guess what it does in a way is well, another thing that I realized is some of the things that it did at the time, and even in kind of 3-4 years, is kind of now a part of ggplot. Like left aligning the title at the time was like you couldn't do that, and adding kind of, and the footer that we were adding to it, we had to work with like kind of going to the internals and add grobs and things like that, which now you can kind of do so much easier. So I guess there's also kind of so much more you can do out of the box now, as opposed to have to go in and write functions to get that title kind of left aligned, which was another sort of thing that took
we
days
spent
of
so
our
long
time
on that,
kind of
trying to figure it out. If only we'd waited a little
the
bit
new version of ggplot, like
for that update.
yeah, 2 years. It's like everything's there. We're like, should we amend everything? It's like, no, let's just keep it, given the effort that's gone into it.
Yeah. Well, Nassos, I said to Clara before you jumped on that the fact that it's simple is actually one of the reasons why I reached out to you, because my book is really pitched to either people who have just like are beginners with R or people who have never used R. So having a simple theme actually is good in my eyes.
I think like one of the things that it does, although it's kind of looks like fine, you could manually do that, but I think it's important in a way because you see so many ggplot graphics, or definitely at the time you used to see so many in kind of a lot of science journals or stats journals, that like the fonts and the numbers are just so small. And like, it's it's the simplest thing just to up the level of the font and not,
Right.
and kind of, but at the same time, if you think that this was kind of just as everything was happening on mobile and you see one of these graphics on a kind of tiny mobile screen, you couldn't read anything really. So kind of just getting quickly out of the box onto a size of font that could be like really read if it's embedded, if it's kind of put into a page on the BBC and it's either online or on the BBC News app, that you could kind of really clearly read everything on a mobile screen, was kind of important, much more important at the time than it feels it should have been. But it was kind of a really big thing rather than the very small font sizes that ggplot gives you out of the box.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a really good point. Well, actually, I'll get into that in a second. It's funny. The other thing, so my brother who doesn't do any data, he runs his own business, but nothing related to data, but he pays attention to kind of like political journalism and just sees people making data visualization, and he can recognize ggplot just by that ugly gray background. The default theme is it's so ubiquitous because so many people just don't take the effort to make even the smallest change. So let me actually do this. Let me just copy this into a new code chunk. So to take kind of what you've done here, let me, before we actually get into it, just to show people, like we could just copy, did I do that correctly? Yeah. All of that, let me just copy this as well. So the BBC theme is just starting here on line 75. All of these things that make kind of individually minor tweaks to the using the theme function, and we end up with the exact same thing. So let's talk through a few of these things. You talked first about the font size. Can you talk about kind of places where you do that and how you do that specifically?
Sorry, Dan, could you explain what you mean? I'm not really sure on the question.
Yeah, well, so I'm just curious. Sure. So you talked about, one of the main things that you wanted to do was increase the font size, right? Like this as opposed to this with all the smaller fonts. So can you just kind of talk about, for example, I see, here with like plot title or subtitle or legend text. Can you just maybe give a couple examples of places where you adjusted the font size to make
so
it
you
more
can see a
readable?
couple of them right at the top there. Like you said, we set the plot title, font and size first, and the plot subtitle, and all of these individual elements were kind of something that we had to discuss each one with the designers on our team as well. So we could have to have talks about exactly what's obviously what font size should it be, but also should the margin be, should it be 8 or 9 on the bottom, things like that. So all of these have kind of been settled on after going through with the designers to see what worked best in production. So we set the larger font size there with the title and the subtitle. You can see it again a little bit further down in legend text. So you can see that we've set a larger size, and again in the axis text a little bit further on as well. We set a larger size.
Yeah, I think the other thing is where we've kind of removed text as well. I don't know if I'm getting ahead of myself, but like we kind of didn't really want an axis title either side, because it was like you get those, but if you've got a subtitle and a title, why would you need to again explain what the axis is? It's kind of like the title and subtitle should kind of do all of that. So we removed the text from and also the kind of vertical sort of axis text is really hard to read on the one side, and then you lose a lot of chart real estate with that's a weird thing to say, chart real estate. Yeah. Anyway, with kind of it having an x-axis title, so we removed that, and that allows you to sort of bump up the size of the axis labels as opposed to kind of squinting to see what does the axis represent, and rather than kind of trying to read a few different, I guess it's kind of like chart hierarchy, kind of rather than trying to read too many things like the x-axis title and the y-axis title, you've only got to read the title, the subtitle, and then the numbers should be big enough so that it kind of all makes sense. So the simplicity is in line with kind of removing.
I think the benefit of that,
well.
Sorry if I can just
Well, and I think
add just one thing to what Nassos was saying, is that
sorry, go.
I think the benefit of that is that it kind of nudges people it kind of forces you to think more about the title and the subtitle, which are so important, to kind of make sure that you're telling the full story with those, rather than just having uninformative text there. So we're kind of trying to, but with the default options and in this theme, we're trying to kind of nudge people to tell as good a story as possible with the title and subtitle.
Yeah. So I just took, you all made, in addition to the package, you made a kind of cookbook to help people see some of these things in action. So I just found one that would do this, where you have a nice subtitle here that explains exactly what's on the y-axis here, so people can understand that without having to have life expectancy written sideways and have people turning their heads. Which makes a ton of sense.
Yeah, and I think, again, like there's nothing, as well, kind of the beauty of it is that there's nothing stopping you from, and the thing that comes out later in the cookbook is that you can change all this, but you can just add layers back onto the theme that will overwrite anything that has happened in the BBC style function. So that's the way we thought about it, because I think sort of one of the things that you had asked in kind of your question sort of before was kind of, it is in a way kind of inflexible, right? It just does some very basic things. We don't have 5 different functions, for example, like BBC style vertical bar chart, BBC style horizontal bar chart, BBC style line chart, or kind of a lot of the other themes at the time, which was one of the things that we saw and just kind of didn't really work for us. They gave you colors that matched kind of, I think there was like an Economist, a Financial Times, or a 538 theme. I don't think they were official themes that the publications themselves had done, but other people had kind of say, let's kind of, if you want to do a graphic in the Economist style, you can use this theme. So they gave you the colors for each line as kind of colors the Economist would use, but we kind of didn't want that, because then it's kind of, if you've got a function for every little thing or every type of chart, then you're not really learning on how to adapt and how to add things onto the theme and how to remove things. So this kind of remained it's kind of a basic skin on as a starting point, and then you can layer stuff on, which I guess goes to the concept of ggplot in general, that you're layering stuff on. But that's kind of how we wanted the theme to be, that you can, if you don't want even something super simple, like there's 2 types of, like a horizontal bar chart and a vertical bar chart, and you need to change the grid lines if you're doing one or the other. And we can even kind of make that into a function, because if you wanted to do that, you could learn how to go through the theme and change that, and then get used to going back into the cookbook, changing stuff. So yeah, that's kind of
I mean, I totally agree with that.
That's interesting, because
I mean, that was like kind of very few things about our work with the bbplot packet were like really intentional from the start. A lot of it was kind of just exploration, like we've been saying before. But one of the things that we did really talk about early on was that we didn't want it to be another. I mean, we had a chart tool already. We didn't want it to be another chart tool, and we wanted to keep it as simple as possible to really make use of. I mean, the flexibility that is like that is the main benefit of ggplot. So I think that was really important.
That's interesting. I mean, I guess, I'm sorry to interrupt you. I was just thinking about like in contrast, I don't know if you all are familiar with HRBR themes and theme ipsum. So that theme gives you, I don't even know how many arguments. And I was thinking about that as a very different approach. I mean, obviously these all have defaults, and so you can just run theme ipsum. But for you, the way, and the reason I said you don't have flexibility, I guess I was meaning it probably too narrowly. I meant it in this context. Like you don't provide arguments for people. Instead, it sounds like the way you provide that flexibility is you encourage people to learn the fundamentals and be able to do things, like this to add on, access titles or whatever through their adding additional lines as opposed to arguments within
definitely.
the BB style theme.
Yeah.
I mean, Nassos was saying that this is all very simple, and that's very true, but it was kind of by design, like, because all that BBC style should do is just literally just the things that you need for every chart that you're making. You want to set the right fonts, you want to strip out the backgrounds, and then everything else you should kind of be free to play around with each individual chart. And we want to keep that separate.
Yeah,
that makes sense. Yeah.
I mean, we've since kind of internally got a few functions that, tighten up like the space on the left-hand side. Things like that, which basically if you're finding I'm literally having to do this every single time, then that's kind of a pretty obvious call that you should have a function that does it. So we have kind of done a few of those, or kind of to change the grid lines, we've got a shorthand rather than kind of, needing to do that. But when we first started out, this was, I think this was the whole point. And I guess in a way, repetition kind of really helped. So the more times you have to like find out how to change the margin of a theme rather than have a function do it for you, initially was good. But for someone coming to our kind of another way where they know all about functions and programming, then the way we approached it would seem kind of terrible. But for us, it kind of really worked to help us get more used to kind of ggplot, the arguments, what the theme does. And it also helped us teach other people within the team because we started slowly and you could explain this is what this line does, as opposed to just run BBC bar chart and you should get there.
Right. Let's talk about it. Even though it's different now. Wait, where is the part of it that left aligns your title?
That's in finalized plot, isn't it?
Oh, okay. Never mind. You're right. So I was telling Clara before you got on Nassos that I'm actually, I really like that function. It's really cool, but I want to keep the focus on this. So, I take that back. Let's actually not talk about this or talk about that portion of it. Is there any other kind of piece of the, I mean, for my book, I'll probably walk through this like in a bit more detail, line by line, but anything else like that you want to kind of highlight, on this custom theme?
I think the cookbook was kind of as important, I think, for us, in terms of kind of, here's a repository of all this information and people could add their new chart styles to, people could add tips and tricks to, and it has been kind of over the years kind of added to again, sort of internally as well in the, and new joiners kind of straight away have something. And we've had kind of a few new people joining over the years. It's kind of like, okay, so I think someone recently, it's kind of, very much a Python person, but because of the cookbook and because of the package could really quickly sort of come into, despite kind of being mainly Python literate, they could kind of within week 2 of being at the BBC, given that they knew how to code and everything was there, they could kind of produce graphics in R. And it just kind of having the cookbook there to talk through how this all works and why and what bit of code does what, rather than having to sit and explain it with someone,
Yeah, I think that's totally
really
right.
helped, I think.
And I think that it was a really
'cause I know
useful way of sharing information internally to kind of feel like everybody was kind of adding in their own. It was kind of the idea was that and it did actually kind of grow organically. The more people that kind of started using R and kind of started adding their own little kind of tips and tricks that they discovered along the way, and like everybody was contributing to it.
Yeah, because I know you've written that having both the theme as well as the cookbook really kind of spurred additional interest in art. I think those are kind of giving people that ownership and letting people um, contribute. It seems like it would really help with that, as well as, of course, like you said, giving people something to start with and some examples that they can use when they're getting started. Um, Last question is if you have any advice for people, say someone is at an organization and they're thinking, oh, I should make a custom theme for my organization. Any advice on how to do that, both from a code perspective as well as from a kind of
I mean,
organizational
I
perspective?
guess the thing that I would have to say based on my experiences is to kind of see the value of and not be afraid to kind of experiment and just kind of not to be afraid to just sort of try things out, and that it's okay if you don't have like a huge plan from day one with everything set in stone and thinking, okay, so I'm gonna do all these things, I'm gonna make this package. You can kind of just start by just being curious, just having this one little problem that you have to solve, and going, oh, okay, I figured that out. What would be the next step to kind of improve upon this? And then one day, maybe you go on from there. You solve the knife problem. One day, you realize that you have a custom theme set. Um, doesn't it doesn't need to be more complicated than that.
Yeah. I guess it's kind of, I guess the first question would be kind of to anyone thinking about it is, do you have a need for it rather than start like, and yeah, exactly as Clara said. So we didn't start with, let's make a package. It just built onto that. So it's kind of break things down into, here's what I want to do and here's what would benefit my organization, and do that rather than start off with the solution is I want to write a package or I want to do a theme, or it's kind of, I guess, what do you actually want to do, want to produce? What do you want your output to be? Because your output isn't, unless kind of you're in software development, your output isn't, I want to do a package. So what
Right.
is your output? And then find building blocks that would kind of provide a solution to that, really. And I get from my experience is like, keep it super simple. I think what we kind of ended up doing was having lots of people in a weird way. This helped other parts of our kind of skill set development as well, in that it was probably the first time we were you as a sort of team, well, I guess 2018 sort of thing, using GitHub and kind of in a way that everyone was pushing to kind of the same GitHub repo and doing changes and commenting. And it kind of really, really helped having loads of people working on one thing collaboratively to kind of really, it was never a task for like one person go out and build a package. And then by little things that everyone added, we also kind of work better collaboratively, work better in terms of documentation, work better, kind of really learn sort of GitHub pull requests and all that stuff a little better. So it benefited a lot of things in parallel.
Uh,
Yeah.
that makes a ton of sense.